السلام عليكم. Welcome back to another episode of Quran in English. My name is Ahmed and I'm happy to take you through another section of chapter Ar-Ra'd, the chapter of thunder, chapter 13. We're continuing from verse number 19 all the way through to 34, I believe. Before I begin, I must tell you that I'm not an Arabic scholar nor a Quranic student. I've not studied the Quran and I've not studied the Arabic language. I mean, I studied Arabic in school, but not like properly. I'm not a linguist. And I haven't studied the Quran. In fact, this is my first read through of the Quran for a lot of the chapters. So I'm merely sharing my education journey with you in the hopes that you might learn along with me, but primarily so that I can learn. So if you have something or a different perspective, feel free to drop a comment. I like the engagement as much as possible, and I appreciate it. As usual, I always begin with أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم, and off we go.
أفمن يعلم أنما أنزل إليك من ربك الحق كمن هو أعمى إنما يتذكر أولو الألباب.
Alrighty, we have an interesting verse for today, which is kind of interesting. So the previous chapter, hey Mahab, welcome. The previous chapter was talking about the difference between truth and misguidance, and those that worship those other than God versus God. And they were doing this whole chapter has been very metaphorical and drawing analogies and similarities and helping us understand truth through the form of almost a poetic comparison. So here the comparison continues. It says, is he who knows that which has been revealed to you from your Lord is truth, like the one who is blind. So here we're seeing here we're seeing a comparison. Is he the one that knows that what he's hearing is truth versus the one who is blind? And it's an interesting comparison. I've had a conversation with someone recently because I went to the Library of Hidden Mysteries or something. There's like a strange esoteric library here in Amsterdam full of like all these kind of philosophies and books, and I had a wonderful conversation with him. And one of the things that I said to him was that when you speak the truth, those people will respond and resonate with it. And I think that is somewhat true for, let's not say half the population, but for the two subsets of people. There are either believers and there are non-believers. For believers, when they hear the truth, they go, I believe, I understand, I hear, I get it. And for the non-believers, it will not resonate with them, it will not make sense, they will not agree, they will disagree, they will mock. And also, even within the believers, I would make subsets of like, there's a certain point in your life where you will believe, and before that point that you do believe, the words won't make sense and won't sound like truth, but after the point that you do believe, they will sound like truth and they will make sense. And here the comparison is by those who hear that what has been revealed to the Prophet Muhammad, the Quran, but it doesn't actually say the Quran. It says revealed to you from your Lord in truth. Which is interesting. We understand it to be the Prophet Muhammad, we understand it to be the Quran. However, if there's another messenger post the Prophet Muhammad and he receives revelation, then that too will be considered truth. So this can also cover that. That was interesting. I thought about this as the Quran as I was reading it the first time, but now I realize it doesn't specify. It just says revealed to you. So if there's a messenger and this verse is talking to them, then that's interesting. But it makes the comparison of those who see the truth versus those who are blind. And it's a beautiful comparison, right? Because not seeing the truth, and this is also something that is a metaphor that we can kind of identify with on the regular person. When someone refuses to see something that is truly in front of them, like if they're in an abusive relationship and they're not recognizing that they're in an abusive relationship, we call them blind, even though it's not about vision, but it's about seeing with your mind's eye more than it is about seeing with your own eye. So it's just an interesting comparison. You either see the truth or you're blind. And it's not even seeing the truth because you hear and you understand the truth. And then the last couple of words in the verse, which is very interesting. Um, it says يَتَذَكَّرُ, which can mean be mindful, which can mean pay heed, but it also means remember. يَتَذَكَّر, see here, I just typed it into Google Translate. The first line, يَتَذَكَّر, means remembers. And that's what I was kind of thinking about it. And the reason why this is interesting is because إِنَّمَا يَتَذَكَّرُ أُولُو الْأَلْبَابِ, the people of reason, those of understanding, those of reason, people of reason, men is wrong, ulu is those. People would be more accurate. People of reason. And this is why they kind of say pay heed and or be mindful, because if you're being reasonable, then you're taking heed and you're being mindful. However, the reason why I say remembers is such an interesting concept, because there's this idea, and I don't know where it came from, but it's that we all made a contract with God before we came to Earth. Before our souls came here, we made a contract that we were going to believe and that we were going to do right and be good. And so recognizing the truth is akin to remembering that covenant that we made before we came here, so to speak. And that's why I say remember is a very interesting one, because also when you kind of hit a moment of belief, and when you finally believe something, I don't know, I had this one moment where I kind of felt like, oh, this is what I've always believed. This is what I've always believed since I was a child, and that I had this faith in me that I forgot. And it's kind of the same. We're drawing the same example of being in a bad relationship, right? When you finally break the spell of recognizing that the person you're with is toxic, all of a sudden you look back at the relationship and you're like, whoa, how did I not see that all of these things that were there before me were clearly signs that this person was bad? And it's kind of like where the remembrance of the revelation of truth comes in. You're always seeing it, but you've forgotten in a way, and you're not paying attention to it, which kind of ties into the word of being mindful and taking heed and paying attention to it, which is kind of interesting. But also, we do see some later references in this chapter that are very specific about what God expects of us from a belief perspective. But I'll get there, and it'll make more sense as we talk about it. Anyway, these people that are the ones that take heed, remember, the people of reason, what about them?
الذين يوفون بعهد الله ولا ينقضون الميثاق.
So those people that remember, that take heed, that are mindful and use reason, they're the ones who fulfill the covenant of God and do not break the contract. And again, it's talking about, is this contract something that you've done before you came here or something that you've done after you come to believe? I think arguments for both can be taken into consideration. You can take the covenants that you make within this life, and some people might say that they didn't make any covenants, they didn't sign any contracts, yada yada yada. And you can also compare it to the contract that we made from beforehand. But essentially the people who take heed and remember, they're the ones that fulfill the covenant with God and do not break the contract. And here's where it gets a little bit interesting.
والذين يصلون ما أمر الله به أن يوصل ويخشون ربهم ويخافون سوء الحساب.
What's interesting is these verses kind of like focus on the good people for a while, which is kind of nice. But those people that, what do we say? They use reason and they fulfill their contract and they do not break they fulfill their covenant and they do not break the pledge. And then it says, and those who join what God commanded for it to be joined. So here they translate it to who maintain whatever God has ordered to be maintained. But it's join is the specific verse, and there's a reason why I'm saying join now, because in the later verses it talks about the disbelievers disconnecting. And they fear God, and they're afraid of the evil account of like doing something wrong. So several things are being said here, but I was trying to think of what does it mean to join that which needs to be joined. And I like the biggest thought that comes to mind is when someone who doesn't believe says it doesn't matter if I do good or bad or wrong, or if I hurt myself or if I hurt others, it doesn't matter. And I feel like they are disconnecting two topics that need to be connected, which is that their actions matter, and the outcome that they're saying doesn't matter matters as well, and their actions are connected to that outcome. So for me, I feel like that's what is to be joined. It's a joining of your behavior and the world around you. That's kind of like the first thing that comes to mind. And it comes in a variety of formats. Like, yeah, whether your behavior affects the world and if that matters or if it doesn't matter. Some people have a nihilistic approach and say that it doesn't matter. You can do whatever you want. Nothing matters. You're free to do whatever you want. And they hurt themselves and they hurt the people around them. That's what I think is being mentioned by joined. But let's contemplate it a bit more, because we are going to get the antithesis of it soon. And it ends with saying, and they fear from God, and they're afraid of an evil account, which ties into the whole purpose of why we're here. And I find this as a counterclaim to Christianity, where people say that, where the Christians say that God loves everyone and his love is unconditional. But then there's a lot of punishment and suffering in the world, and for them, those two things don't make sense. And I agree. It doesn't make sense. I don't think that God loves everybody. And I think the fact that we're living in this world today and not in heaven is a testament to sin being in our lives, to the fall of Adam and Eve, to all this perspective. And that we have to be afraid in a way. We are in this test. We are in the ultimate test, as far as we are concerned, because it's our lives and it's eternity and it's our souls, right? We are in this extremely crucial and extremely relevant evaluation of us, and our actions have such an impact on it, and we should be afraid of an evil, a strict judgment. Su' al-hisab kind of means like the worst of the worst of the counts, the worst of the reckoning. Essentially, getting a bad grade, and as we should. There needs to be a little bit of fear. It's not just love. It's not just la di da. Everyone hold hands, kumbaya. There is an element of your actions matter. You know. Hello, Round Rodent. Welcome to the channel. Anyway, continue saying.
والذين صبروا ابتغاء وجه ربهم وأقاموا الصلاة وأنفقوا مما رزقناهم سرا وعلانية ويدرؤون بالحسنة السيئة أولئك لهم عقبى الدار.
Now, reading this specific verse taught me something very valuable today, because I had an issue with it, but let me explain it. Let me translate it first and then explain what I mean. And continuation of those who use reason, those who fulfill their and they join whatever God tells them to join. They fear their God and they're afraid of the bad time. And they're the ones who are patient, waiting, seeking the face of their Lord. So they're enduring patiently. They're doing everything patiently, even the suffering. And we saw this in the previous chapter with Joseph and Jacob, Yusuf wa Yaqub, their Arabic names. And how they suffered a lot, and that they were very patient, and that even in the face of catastrophic things, they were patient. And this is kind of like one of the key lessons that kind of keeps popping up. Be patient. And the reason why people are patient is because they're waiting the face of their Lord. Which actually, now that I think about it, I don't, in kind of the Genesis concept of things, or in the story of Adam and Eve, I don't ever recall them seeing God's face. And I don't know if this is literal or metaphoric. I don't know if we will literally see God's face, if God has a face, or if it's a metaphorical expression. If God has a metaphorical expression, metaphorical face, and that seeing his face is kind of meeting him, so to speak. There's a question. Hey, just tuning in. You were saying that God does not love everyone. Can you expand a little more on this? God loving everyone is a Christian concept as far as I can tell. The way that I'm reading the Quran is that the Injil is from God, and the Injil loosely translates to the Gospels. So I believe that Christianity has a lot of lessons and a lot of guidance, and specifically what Jesus was teaching is the beauty of it. I don't know enough about Christianity to tell you why they came to the conclusion that God loves everyone and God is unconditional. But from what I read from the Quran, and by the way, the Quran's perspective is that Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, they're all from God. They're all praying to the same God. They're all the same concept. And so from my understanding from the Quran is that it doesn't really describe God's love so much as it describes God's mercy, and that everybody can receive God's mercy as long as they ask for it. But many people will not ask for God's mercy and therefore will not receive it and will eventually burn in hell. And that idea, and that's also a Christian concept, right? The Christian concept of hell exists. So the fact that hell exists and the fact that unconditional love doesn't make sense with hell existing, I agree with. It doesn't make sense with having a God that unconditional. So for me, by default, unconditional love from at least a human understanding of love, the way that God does, doesn't really make sense. Who does Allah turn away from? Sorry if that question is heretical phrasing. I don't know what that means. Who does Allah turn away from? Allah just means God. Allah is the word for the God. Like Al means the, God means La. La is God. Allah just means God. It's just the Arabic word for God. So I don't know what you mean. Anyway, back to the verse. Those who patient and seeking to seek the face of their Lord, it might be metaphorical. Who does he not love? I don't know if God loves or does not love. I'm telling you that it doesn't make sense. Unconditional love with the existence of hell doesn't make sense, and I agree with that. That's pretty much what I'm saying. Seeking to see the face of God, which might be metaphorical, might be literal. And establish the prayer. These are the people that establish prayer, and they spend from what has provided to them. And this is what I learned, very important. They spend from what has provided from them in secret and publicly. And I used to hear before that, oh, you have to give to the poor, but you have to kind of do it secretly and don't announce to the world because you don't want to be proud and boastful. And there are some people that give to the poor only so that they can boast about it, and I think that's who it's talking about. But for me, I was generally giving to the poor, and I generally do give to the poor quite a lot. I donate to the homeless around me quite regularly. And I felt bad about saying that because I was like, oh, am I being one of those boastful people? But I'm like, no. I mean, talking about it is also kind of good because, good deeds infect other people with good deeds. So it's okay to talk about giving to charity. I felt bad about talking about it because I'm like, am I being boastful or am I not being boastful? Which is kind of nice. And these good people, they repel evil, the sins with the good deeds. They respond to evil with goodness. I like respond to evil with goodness. So if someone does them wrong, they do something good in return. Kind of as a concept, let's keep it loose and not complicated. And those for them, for them is the final uqbad dar, which is the ultimate abode, is a nice way of translating. But it doesn't talk much about it now, but it talks about heaven in the next verse.
جنات عدن يدخلونها ومن صلح من آبائهم وأزواجهم وذرياتهم والملائكة يدخلون عليهم من كل باب
verse we're in? 1, 2, 3. Quran. What am I doing? 2, 3. Yeah. So I was saying that their final destination is a great one, and then it describes their final destination, which is Gardens of Eden, that they will enter it with whoever is righteous. And this is kind of important to you, Round Rodent, because it talks upon the topic. Gardens of Eden, and when they will enter with it, whoever is righteous from their fathers and their spouses and their offspring, and the angels will enter upon them from every gate, which is a beautiful expression. And time again, we've seen in the Quran and the previous parables, and the parable that most all three of Jewish, Christians, and Muslims can easily talk about is the parable of, not even the parable, the story of Noah and the flood. And in the Quran, it talked about the details of Noah and his flood, and that his son was one of the non-believers. And Noah was telling everyone, a flood's coming. By the way, God's saying, you got to be careful. You got to join me if you believe. And Noah's son was so much a disbeliever that even as the flood was happening around him, Noah was on the ship and he was calling out to his son, get on the ship. You're going to die. You're going to flood. His son was so disbelieving in what his father was saying. He's like, no, I'm going to go up the mountain and I'll be fine. And this kind of talks into the concept of unconditional love. Like, I don't think the way that, and what God's advice to Noah at that point in time was, let him go. He's not going to be a believer. And this is kind of the example that I get from here. The people who go into heaven are you and those who are righteous from the fathers, their spouses, and their offspring, which means those who are not righteous do not get into heaven. And there's not a concept of unconditional love for all. There is suffering for those that are not believing, and there is heaven for those that believe and do good. And there is a split between the two, and God's mercy is upon those who believe. In fact, those who believe are through God's mercy as well, which we will talk about a little bit in the couple of coming verses. So, in that sense, God's love, quote unquote, does not extend to, but love is a very human concept. I don't know if it applies to God in that sense. I don't think that I understand, and I don't think God behaves or thinks or feels as a human. So to say that God loves is a bit strange to me, because the way that I understand it is God is more akin to a force of nature than he is to a human, right? It says, but Allah does love the righteous do-gooders, the steadfast, the repentant, in a very conditional sense. Maybe not. But like I said, love isn't the word that I would use to describe God's relationship to us. Mercy is. He has mercy upon us as a kind of a verb, not necessarily love as a feeling, you know? At least I don't think that God feels in the way that we do. I don't know. Maybe there's something that I have to learn more about that, but that's what I'm talking about. And we'll talk about more about who God guides and who doesn't. But this is heaven. Heaven is only the ones who do good and the righteous of their fathers, their spouses, their offspring. And the angels enter from every door. I think it's very cool. I'd love to meet some angels. Anyway, we continue. And this is what they say in heaven.
سلام عليكم بما صبرتم فنعم عقبى الدار.
And there is the word again, the final attainment, عقبى الدار. And here it says, after the angels come in from every door, they say, peace be upon you, salam alaikum. This is a very common greeting in Arabic, in specifically Muslim cultures, Arabic, but it's a very common Arabic greeting everywhere. Salam alaikum, peace be upon you. And it says, salam alaikum, peace be upon you, for what you patiently endured, for what you were patient through a lot. So well done on surviving all that pain, all that. Even the righteous good doers and the steadfast and the repentant will have difficult lives, because life is difficult. Life has death. If you love something, it's going to die. We all die. We all suffer. There's cancer. There's disease. There's hell. Like, life is designed to have beauty and pain, and you have to patiently endure. And if you're able to patiently endure and maintain your faith throughout, you get angels telling you salam alaikum in heaven. And then it says, and how excellent is the ultimate abode, how beautiful is the final destination. There's kind of like, it's just a piece. If you get to this stage, there's a sense of unbelievable fulfillment. And if you've ever really tried to do something and struggled for so long to achieve it, and then you finally achieve it, you have such a sense of accomplishment. This is the ultimate sense of accomplishment, is what it's saying.
والذين ينقضون عهد الله من بعد ميثاقه ويقطعون ما أمر الله به أن يوصل ويفسدون في الأرض أولئك لهم اللعنة ولهم سوء الدار.
And since this whole chapter is about duality, it's about sun, moon, good, bad, truth, falsehood, we now see the comparison of those who, first we were talking about those who maintain and abide by God's covenant, the covenant that they may have made before they came to earth or after. And on the opposite flip side are those who break the covenant of God from after contracting it, and they sever what God commanded for it to be joined. And here's that term again, something that needs to be joined, and they sever what needs to be joined. And the example I gave before was the connection between our actions and consequence, our actions and responsibility, our actions and something that matters. And I was saying that the disbelievers, the ones who don't believe, are the ones that say, no, there's no connection between what we're doing and what's going to happen to us. There's no consequence. There's no test. There's no nothing. So it's kind of like a separation from our divine purpose. And that's kind of an interesting one. A separation of our divine purpose from our behavior to our cosmic roles in the world. And it continues to say, and those that spread corruption in the earth, those for them is a curse, and for them is the worst of homes. Those who condemn will have the worst abode. Let me just block somebody real quick. Oh God. Why do you do this to me? Block. Alright, we can continue. I obviously wasn't blocking you, Rodent. I was just blocking the bot that is Alex. You know what? It's having a problem, but it's fine. Okay. Where were we? Next.
الله يبسط الرزق لمن يشاء ويقدر وفرحوا بالحياة الدنيا وما الحياة الدنيا في الآخرة إلا متاع.
And here is the first hint of kind of a common theme that's going to come in the next couple of verses. God extends the provision and the blessings for whom he wills, and he restricts his provisions for whom he wills. He gives abundant or limited provisions to whom he wills. And here it's talking about provisions. And I think the concept is, did you mean that apostasy is unforgivable? I forgot the word apostasy. I think apostasy means to walk away from the renunciation of political belief. Okay, we'll take a step back. The ones who break the covenant of God. So in the beginning of the episode, I was talking about potentially the covenant with God that we had made before we arrived on earth, which is that we will believe. But here it says, after بعد ميثاقه. Here it's saying after it's been affirmed, after it's been contracted. There is a different verse in the Quran that talks about apostasy. Apostasy, of course, is believing in God and then breaking your vow and not believing in God afterwards. And for instance, when I grew up, I was born into a Muslim family, So I was born into a world of believers, but I didn't make a commitment or a covenant with God that I would believe. And so when I left Islam when I was about 20, I wouldn't consider that apostasy, because I had not had the breakthrough that I needed in order to believe again. But apostasy is unforgivable, but I don't know if that's what this verse means. I think this verse is talking about the covenant they made with God after contracting it. Because some people go their whole lives without contracting a covenant with God, right? But some people can also make covenants with God in terms of, if you do this, then I will do that. If you save me, then I will do this. So I think it's just talking about a general covenant, but it could be talking about the metaphorical soul contract that I was talking about beforehand. But this verse is not specifically targeting apostasy. There are other verses in the Quran that talk about apostasy. Anyway, the next verse said, God extends his provisions and limits his provisions to whoever he wills. Rejoice. And here it says, it doesn't say the disbelievers, but we kind of understand it. They rejoice in the life of the worldly life, and this worldly life, in comparison to the hereafter, is except for an enjoyment. This life is just, it's constantly expressed as enjoyment, as something, as like a game, as like entertainment, as like decoration. It's not real. This world isn't what's real. What's going to come after we die is what's real. This world is kind of like, that's why I like the idea of simulation theory, because this world feels like a simulation. It's not real. Sometimes things happen in a specific way. You're like, this is kind of super strange. It's super weird. It's kind of like story-like. It's very weird. And here this verse is saying that life is just, in comparison to the hereafter, life is nothing. Life is just a game, nothing but a fleeting enjoyment.
ويقول الذين كفروا لولا أنزل عليه آية من ربه قل إن الله يضل من يشاء ويهدي إليه من أناب.
Now this is a very interesting concept, because it was something that was brought up with Michael. Hey, Michael. Okay, let's see what it says first. And it says, those who disbelieved said, if only it had been sent upon him a sign from his Lord. Which, a sign, like ayatun is always, ayat refers to a sign, refers to sometimes a miracle, refers to sometimes as the verse from the Quran. And I feel like they're talking about this about the Prophet, because this is what they told him. They told him that what you came with only words, you didn't come with a miracle. If only you had come with a miracle. But then he says something interesting. And this is something that we can all say, because it's not just limited to the Prophet here. It says, say, O Prophet, because we understand the context. However, we can also say this. Say, indeed, God lets go astray whom he wills, and guides to him whoever turns back. Now, this is a very interesting concept. First of all, it's saying God will let go astray from whoever he wills. And this is something that I've talked about time and time again, and I've had arguments with people. God, if he wishes for you to be not guided, you are not going to be guided. And then there was the concept of, what does that mean for free will? If God causes you not to be guided, then you don't really have free will. The other example, and the other way that it has been explained to me, in the context of this verse, Inna Allah yudillu man yasha, whom he wills, the other explanation is that whom the person wills, God will let him go astray. So if the person wills to be led astray, God will let him go astray, which I don't agree with. I think it's God. But I also think that it has to do, is it God's choice or is it ours? And I think the answer is both. God's choice is our choice in a weird way. We still have the choice. If at any point in time you have the choice to say, I want to believe and I don't want to, or I don't want to believe. And if you say, I want to believe and I want God's mercy, you're going to believe and you're going to get God's mercy. And if you say, I don't want to believe, I don't want God's mercy, you're not going to believe and you're not going to get God's mercy. Free will still exists. God knows what choice we're doing. And God's will is also kind of in a way our will, because he created us and he created us in a specific way. So everything that we are matters. But there's a reason why it all works. But the reason why this is also interesting is it says, and guides to him whoever turns back. And this is a very fascinating concept, because I've been also looking into Greek culture for quite some time, and there is that the Prometheus story, where he loses the love of his life. What was her name? Eurydice. And he goes down to Hades to get him back, and he sings a song that's so beautiful that moves the gods of the underworld to bring him back. They say you can bring her back as long as you leave the underworld, walk back to the real world, and you can't turn around. And if you do turn around, then she's lost to you forever. And in the story, Prometheus does turn around. So that's the reason why I bring this up, is because here it's saying, guides to him whoever turns back. And I find this very interesting, because I feel like when I was born, maybe I was a bit more of a believer when I was younger, but as I became like a teenager and kind of thought for myself, I kind of Orpheus, not Prometheus. You're right, Orpheus, not Prometheus. That's the fire guy. I apologize for the disconnection. But anyway, when I was younger, and eventually when I kind of grew into my own form of reasoning and figuring out what the world was, I kind of didn't believe, right? And I feel like that's part and parcel. I don't know if I'm speaking, I might be using my personal experience and painting a brush on somebody else. But I feel like I had to walk into disbelief. Like that was always the path that was ahead of me. And I had to get lost, and I had to be misguided. And then I eventually, at some point, through the loss of the love of my life, I turned back towards faith, turned back towards God, and here it says, turns towards him. It honestly just says turns back, which could be a metaphor, could be literal, but I think it's a metaphor because God's not physically behind us. But it's kind of that concept that when you're born, you kind of walk away from God in a way, until you kind of figure it out, and you have to find your way back to God. And that this world kind of tempts you into like continuing into the illusion, thinking that everything that you see, touch, hear, and feel is all that matters. And it kind of like casts a spell on you to kind of keep you walking away. And it takes effort to say, no, I'm not going for what I see before me, but I'm going back to the source, back to God, back to the truth. And it's such a beautiful expression. And it's the exact opposite of Orpheus and Eurydice. And Orpheus and Eurydice, when he turns back, it's a bad thing. Whereas here, turning back is a good thing. And it's like, it's literally the opposite, because Eurydice would be the world, and we have to turn away from the world in order to find God in this weird kind of concept. It's such a beautiful and fascinating concept. He said, have you ever read Love Dogs by Rumi? This verse reminds me of that poem. Also, how do you feel about Rumi? Love Rumi. Love Rumi. Rumi is very spiritual, very poetic, very fantastic. And I believe that there are so many paths to God. And Rumi is magic in motion. I love everything that I hear about them. You can feel Rumi has unconditional love for God, and that's a beautiful concept, and that's something that I can understand and I agree with. Rumi is fantastic. But I've not read Love Dogs specifically, but I will look it up after this verse. I have until verse 34 is for today's session, and then I'll look it up after. But yeah, beautiful. Turn to God, whoever turns to Him.
الذين آمنوا وتطمئن قلوبهم بذكر الله ألا بذكر الله تطمئن القلوب.
This is something that I used to see when I was younger, and I never really understood until now. And it sees, and it continues to say, He guides whoever turns to God, and those who turn to God are those who believe, and their hearts are satisfied by the mention of God. Bidhikrillah. It says remembrance, but I believe it means mention of God, because it's like by saying God's name, by mentioning God's name. And I'll explain that why in a second. And then here it says, isn't it so that the mentioning of God's name satisfies the hearts? Surely the remembrance of God finds Allah due hearts. I don't think it's remembrance. I think it is mention 100%. And the reason why I say this is because growing up, the elders around me, my uncles, my aunts, my parents had always said Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim before eating food. Astaghfirullah al-Azim when they saw something terrible happening, which Astaghfirullah means I seek repentance. Bismillah, which means in the name of God. A'udhu billahi minash shaitan rajim, I seek refuge from God. And God was always on their tongues, and they mentioned Him so much and so often. And A'udhu billahi minash shaitan rajim, Bismillah, 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 Bismillah. And I was like, why do they mention His name so much? And why do they have to say it so much? And there's this human concept that if you say something a lot, it's because you don't really believe in it. But I love this explanation of it. That tatma'in is not satisfied. It's kind of like being at peace, finding comfort. There's a word that it's driving me crazy. Tatma'in. It's kind of like placate, kind of like satisfy. Be at peace. And that when you mention God's name, it puts you at peace. And I think this is something that we can also kind of take, and we see this in the example in the previous chapter with Yusuf and Yaqub, which of course is Joseph and Jacob. And that Jacob, when he lost a son, he mentions God, and he's suffering, but he keeps mentioning God, and he finds peace in saying and reminding himself about God. And it is about reminding as well. Remembrance is correct, but I do feel like it's specifically saying it to remember it, saying it to keep God at the top of mind, and that saying it brings peace to our hearts. It's a rhetorical question. Is it not that the remembrance of God puts at peace the hearts? Do the hearts find comfort? It's a very beautiful, beautiful expression. And it definitely does now. And that's kind of like a measure for those who actually turn to God and those who don't, is that when you mention God around them, they're at peace. Yeah.
الذين آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات طوبى لهم وحسن مآب.
And it continues to say about the believers, the ones who turn to God, they're the ones who believed and they did righteous deeds. طوبى لهم وحسن blessedness is for them, and what a beautiful place of return. Okay, so here's kind of, this is how I understood it, is that when you mention God and you find peace within your heart, life becomes more manageable. It's not that praying to God is going to remove terrible things that happen to you. Terrible things are going to happen because we live in on earth. We don't live in heaven, and on earth bad things happen. And they say that perspective matters, and it shapes your experience, and that having a good attitude, even if bad things happen to you, you still have a better experience than someone who has a bad attitude, who goes, and the same bad thing can happen to two people, and one person says, it's okay, it's from God, I accept, and the other person goes, why does this always happen to me, this always sucks, blah, 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 blah. And that person continues to have a terrible, terrible experience because of what they keep saying and thinking. And the person who believes in God and has peace in it has a much more pleasant experience. And this reminds me of one of the most sad moments of my life, was when I I rear-ended someone as I was driving. It was late at night. They sped past me, and then they stopped at the traffic light, and I didn't see them stop, and it was bad. And I did a lot of damage to their car, and it was really bad, and I felt so guilty, and I felt so horrible, and it was very much my mistake. I can't blame anybody else for it. But the men that came out of the car, this was in Bahrain, which was very beautiful, and they came out, and they weren't angry at all. They had peace. I don't know. They just said it happens. This is what was written for us. This is what God's chosen for us. And it was like I was so nervous and so scared and so terrified that it done such damage, and it was really a stupid mistake of mine, and I was completely to blame. And they weren't angry. And like this is kind of the difference between, and this is what tuba lahum for me translates to. Bliss will be for them, blessedness is for them, because even their life is not that their life will have more blessings, it's that they will have a more blessed life because of their perspective and because of their belief. And they made my life better, and they made me want to be a better man. And it took me a while to kind of get there. But it's, yeah. And then, of course, there's a beautiful place of return that we will go to. Heaven is the second reward, but a better life is the first reward, just by virtue of believing.
كذلك أرسلناك في أمة قد خلت من قبلها أمم لتتلو عليهم الذي أوحينا إليك وهم يكفرون بالرحمن قل هو ربي لا إله إلا هو عليه توكلت وإليه متاب ولو
And here it talks about the prophet, but it could be a bit more broader about that. It says, and thus we have sent you to a nation, verily from before it has passed other nations, so that you may recite upon them what we revealed to you while they are disbelieving in Al-Rahman, which is another name of God, whose mercy is most encompassing. It's about his mercy again. And then it says, say, he is my Lord, there is no God but him. Upon him I put my trust, and to him I return. And this is something we can all say. We can all say, he is my God, there is no God but him, and upon him I put my trust, and to him I return. It's a very beautiful saying. But it's interesting that it says, and thus we have sent you. What is it about what is being said that says that? Anyway.
أن قرآنا كذلك أرسل ولو أن قرآنا سيرت به الجبال أو قطعت به الأرض أو كلم به الموتى بل لله الأمر جميعا أفلم ييأس الذين آمنوا أن لو يشاء الله لهدى الناس جميعا ولا يزال الذين كفروا تصيبهم بما صنعوا قارعة أو تحل قريبا من دارهم حتى يأتي وعد الله إن الله لا يخلف الميعاد.
Okay. Quite a few things are being said here, which are very interesting. First it says, and if it was the Quran, and if the Quran could move with it mountains, or tear asunder by it the earth, or the dead could be made to speak by it. So if the Quran, I think this is what the people are saying, the disbelievers are saying. If the Quran could move mountains, split the earth, or speak to the dead. And then it says, nay, with God is the command for all. But all matters are by God. So I think, this is kind of like the conversation saying, if only the Quran could do this. But then it says, no, but all matters come back to God, which means, I think this is saying that God knows why the Quran isn't doing any of those things, but we will know in a later stage because this is what God wants. And then it says, do they not despair? And again, I translated this, Jamian afalam yayas, have they not despaired? Because for some reason, they're not using the word despair. They're saying no. And here, have the believers not realized? Here they use realize, and here they use no, but it says despair. And it's driving me crazy. I don't know why. Then, do they not despair, those that believe? Indeed, if God had willed, then he would have guided all people, all mankind. And for me, it makes sense that the people who believe do despair this. And the prime example of this is Noah. Noah wants everybody to believe and wants specifically his son to believe. And he despaired about his son not believing. You know? The believers do despair that God does not guide everybody together. And then it says, and do not cease those who, and they do cease. It's weird to say that the Arabic language is a bit strange. And those who disbelieve still do not cease. Nonetheless, those who disbelieve are still affected by what they did with a disaster, or it settles near to their homes until comes the promise of God. And disasters will continue to afflict the disbelievers or strike close to their homes for their misdeeds. And for me, this is still what the believers despair upon, that the disbelievers aren't getting the disasters near their homes until the promise of God, which is the promise of God is Judgment Day. And I think this is kind of something what people struggle with, even those who believe, they struggle with the idea that God isn't punishing the corrupt or isn't bringing, because the Quran is full of stories about the evil being punished after they've been warned by God through a messenger, and that they've been earthquakes, screams, shouts, floods, and that nowadays you see the corrupt are getting away with what they're doing, and that does cause despair amongst the believers. This is a very complicated verse. My understanding is completely different than what is being said. And then in the end it says, indeed, God does not fail the promise. If we read the English translation, it says, if the recitation could be cause the mountains to move or earth to split or the dead to speak, it would have been this Quran. It doesn't make sense to me. But matters are all by God's will. That is the one thing that I agree with this statement. It says, have the believers not realized that God had willed, he could have guided all humanities. And again, realized and know is not yayas. Yayas is despaired. أَفَلَمْ يَيْأَسَ الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا. Did the people who believe not despair? I do not agree with this. And disasters will continue to afflict the disbelievers. And again, I think this is about what they despair, because disasters are not just affecting the disbelievers. Well, maybe they will. Maybe they are. I don't know. Maybe I'm misunderstanding and disasters are affecting them. But Qari'ah is like a big disaster, right? It's not like small things happening to bad people, until God's promise comes, and indeed God will not fail his promise. Yeah.
ولقد استهزئ برسل من قبلك فأمليت للذين كفروا ثم أخذتهم فكيف كان عقاب.
I hate the repetition within a verse, within an ayah. It just there's a reason why it's this verse. I hate the repetition. Anyway, sorry. And certainly the messengers were mocked from before you. And here it says something interesting. So I granted respite to those that disbelieved, and then I seized them. And this is what I was talking about. In the previous verses, in the previous chapters, we heard about messengers coming down to people denying them, some sort of reckoning from God coming to deal with those people. And this is what this is exactly talking about. And then it says look at how how was their punishment is wrong, their destination, their end. What was their end? فكيف كان عقابي. It could be punishment. Was the delay for them to be able to find their way? Interesting question. Good question. I think the way that I've understood it is that messengers come to people and most people don't listen. No, I mean, like, there are a lot of messengers that came down to people, and a lot of people ignored the messengers, and then God delivered some punishment of a certain point after the people had been given an opportunity to believe and they did not believe. However, there was a case of Jonah and the whale, and that his people did believe. And even those that, when they did believe, God said, and we gave them respite for a time being from our punishment. And then in a way they seized them because they did die, but it was like the torment was lifted upon them and extended. But here what I think it means, when I granted respite to those who disbelieved and then I seized them, I think this talks about not just about the opportunity to believe, but also about God's plan, and that sometimes God's punishment doesn't always come immediately. It's not like you do bad things and you suffer. Sometimes you do bad things and you have a long life of joy because this earth is a simulation, and you're simulated a life of pleasant life, and then you suffer massively and you're taken. It could be to believe, it could be because of God's plan, it could be for a variety of ways, so to speak. Last two verses.
أفمن هو قائم على كل نفس بما كسبت وجعلوا لله شركاء قل سموهم أم تنبئونه بما لا يعلم في الأرض أم بظاهر من القول بل زين للذين كفروا مكرهم وصدوا عن السبيل ومن يضلل الله فما له من هاد.
Okay, it says a lot of things here. But first it says, then who is it he who is standing on every soul for what it has earned? As in standing and recording, watching what every soul is. And here it starts with kind of like a question. Here they're saying, is there an equal? But I think it is, and it's also أَفَمَنْ هُوَ قَائِمٌ. Then who is it that he is standing over every soul and watching what it earns? It's kind of like rhetorical questions. And then here it says, and yet they made to God partners. They made partners to God. And here it says, say, name them. Which is there's a lot of times when the Quran kind of talks about the believers and talks about the messengers. And it also like talks about how you should deal with the disbelievers and how you should deal with those who claim there are other gods. And it's a very confrontational name them, say their names. And then it says here, or or do you inform him, so those who believe that there are other gods, or do you inform him of what you do not know in the earth, or the appearance of words, or are these gods just empty words, or is it just words that appear like you're saying things like, oh, Hecate, Lucifer, blah, blah, blah. So you're saying things that kind of just sound like they're things, but they're not really things. And it's interesting that it says, or do you inform him of what you do not know in the earth? I wonder of what they're saying. Because here, I kind of understood that they meant, they capitalized him. So what they're saying is, or do you inform God? But I don't think it's talking about God. I think here it's talking about the person who's saying, name them, which is the message of the prophet. And I feel like here is an interesting point. Anyway, they say, so name these gods, and then are you telling me of something but here it's la ya'lamu fil ard, and this is why they say it's God, because of what he does not know on the earth. And that's why they say God. Are you informing God of something that he does not know on the earth, something that isn't real? And then here it says, or is it apparent for the words that they say? And then it says, nay, it is made fair seeming. It looks like a good idea. It was made like a pretty illusion for those who disbelieved their plots. They're like, oh, this idea, I'm going to trick people. I'm going to say this, I'm going to say that. It seemed like such a good idea to them. And they are hindered from and they're hindered from the path. And here the phrasing that is being said is, again, for me, super clear. And whoever is misguided by God, then he will have no one to guide him. وَمَنْ يُضْلِلِ اللَّهُ, whoever God misguides, then he has no guide. And again, here it's saying this is an action. Yudlilullah. It's not the person is causing God to go astray. It's God causing the person to go astray. The person cannot affect God. And here it's saying if God makes you go astray, then you're not going to have any guide, no real guide to bring you here. And again, I know it takes the concept of free will away, but free will matters from our perspective. Free will doesn't matter from God's perspective. There's two ways to look at it. God is super knowing, all-knowing, and all different. And God knows what we're going to do at every point in time. And God created us in a specific way for a specific reason to do specific things. So in God's perspective, there is no free will. But from our perspective, we have a choice. You have a choice to believe or not believe. And here you can throw your hands up and say, oh, God doesn't want to guide me, so I'm not going to be guided. You know what? Good. Stay. Fine. If you want it differently, you can choose, but you're saying you don't want to choose differently. So you're actually making a choice with your statement of lack of choice, which is kind of interesting. Last verse for today.
لهم عذاب في الحياة الدنيا ولعذاب الآخرة أشق وما لهم من الله من واق.
And those people who God leads astray, for them is a punishment in the current life, the worldly life that we see, and a punishment in the hereafter is harder. The punishment in the hereafter is much worse, and they do not have for them against God from any defender, any shield, any protection. Yeah, and I kind of get the concept of free will. Like, if God's deciding, then we have no free will. You don't know what God's decided. You don't know what is written. What's written is what's going to happen. And in that sense, we don't have free will. But you, right now, can you make a choice? You can. Choose. Is it an illusion? Is it not an illusion? That's a far more complicated perspective. You can choose to believe. You can choose not to believe. And I recommend you choose to believe, because you ain't going get no respite. But anybody who's listening to my channel and watching this should be theoretically believing, but there are people like Wahab, for example. Anyway, that concludes our episode for today. So I usually always end with Sadaqallahu al-Ali al-Azim, which means trusted is the word of God who is most exalted. And I appreciate you for joining me, and I will be back tomorrow morning. But anyway, YouTube, you'll see this tomorrow. Thanks for watching. Ma'as salama. Bye.